name of the podcast is The Big Questions because precisely of this question that I ask everybody, I think it's the biggest question of all, certainly one of the most interesting. And that question is, who are you?
Who am I? Well, my name is Cora DeVos. I am an Inuit woman from originally from Cambridge Bay, Nunavut, and now living in Vermilion, Alberta. And as well as being in insurance, I'm also a photographer.
Very cool. So you were born in Nunavut and then you moved eventually to Alberta. And when did you make that transition or that move to Alberta?
So my family lived up there until I was about 3 years old, and then we moved to the south. My dad is from the Edmonton area, and back then we would have had to be shipped out for school, so residential schools, once we hit high school. So my parents didn't really want us raised up there, so we moved down south when I was about 3 years old. And then we moved back up north with my mom after my parents separated. So I was about around 14 years old.
So you were basically entering teenage years.
Yeah.
So did you end up then going to residential school because you were back there and that's the way they did things there, or?
No, by that time, we did get a K to 12 school in Cambridge Bay. So there were still kids, like my best friend. She was from a small settlement town, and she got brought to Cambridge Bay, but it wasn't so much a residential school at that area at that time because they just had a hostel. So they had local parents that were there as the host parents for all these kids that would come from different communities.
Wow, okay. So
Yeah.
so the initial move away was because at that time, if you had stayed there, the expectation was that you would end up going to residential school, but then that changed while you were gone and they built like a public school in that town that you returned to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, okay. So yeah, so before that though, everybody that grew up in that town would end up going to a residential school?
Yes, correct.
And was that residential school still around and open and active after they opened the K to 12, or did it get shut down because they had finally opened like a public school?
Yeah, I believe by that point it had already been shut down because most of the communities, I think that was around the transition time when people started realizing that it wasn't probably the best thing for people in the world. So yeah, by that point, most communities in the north did have K to 12, and those that didn't, the kids would get sent to Yellowknife for school at that point.
Right. Wow, incredible.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, because so my understanding is that the residential schools, some of them, like the last one was closed in like the 90s or something like that. So I mean, the way people talk about it, it sounds like it was this thing that happened in the far distant past, but the 90s is not that distant at all.
Not at all. No.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah. So what was your experience then going back to that town and going through what was basically a different form of education, I suppose? Would it have been very different from like a residential school?
Yeah, yeah. Cambridge Bay, it was just a regular school by that point. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So what would have been the sort of difference then generationally from people who grew up and went through the residential school system versus now your generation, which was going through a public education? Was there any kind of like difference in terms of the mentality or the sort of the lifestyle or anything like that? Like I imagine there's a big impact there.
Yeah, I want to say, like, even for myself growing up, my mom never really put too much emphasis on going to school. Like, it wasn't a big deal to her if I went or not.
Mhm.
And I feel like that was the consensus for most people. I think because there was so much trauma that they associated themselves with school. So the parents,
Right.
they didn't put such an emphasis on it. So
So then there was less motivation for some people, obviously, to go and to try, and you just skip class and whatnot, right? And there was no
Yeah,
real consequence,
yeah.
right? Okay, yeah.
You
So
don't,
wow, that's interesting.
yeah, you don't go for a week and then, you go one day. Yeah, it was very much like that. So
Right. Yeah. I never even thought of that, but yeah, the sort of trauma and the association of that trauma with school means that like your parents, wouldn't have necessarily pushed you hard in school or even cared that much if you went. I never even thought of
mhm,
that. Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Interesting. So then for someone to go through school, like were you the kind of person that just went through it and you kind of pushed and wanted to go, or were you the kind of person that just went one day every other week? You know what I mean? Where did you fall in that spectrum?
I definitely had my moments, but
Yeah.
as a teenage kid, it was like, oh, my mom doesn't care, why do I, right? But
Right, of course.
at the same time, growing up, I always knew that the way that I grew up, I wanted different.
Right.
I wanted to do more and be more than what my role model had showed
Yeah.
me through growing up. So
Yeah. So is that because you had seen that there was more or different ways, or was that just an intuition that you had?
I'd say a little bit of both. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, because if that's all you've known, right, how would you know that there is a different way or a better way? But obviously you had some inkling of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think maybe it was the time that we had down in Alberta that I
Mhm.
was subjected to a bigger world than just our small community, right? So maybe that's where it came from. And I could see how other people lived and went to my friends' houses and saw how they lived versus us, right? So I
Right.
think I think maybe that was it. I had more of a drive because I had a bigger scope of what
Yeah.
was out there.
Wow. Yeah. So that move to Alberta, though it wasn't permanent, obviously it had an impact on you.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So growing up, wherever in Alberta or in Nunavut, what was your sort of connection or relationship to your cultural background, your cultural history, or the traditions, that sort of thing, the myths and the history of your people? Was that something that was taught to you by your peers? Was that something that was totally left out, or where were you with that?
Oh no, residential school had definitely done its job when it came to my mom. Like she had completely lost her language, and so didn't pass it down to us. And for the most part, growing up in Alberta, the amount of Inuit in Alberta is a small group. So we didn't really have access to our culture and everything. So I want to say that I really, and even just going up there as a teenager, I wish I could turn back time because I would have taken advantage of that time up there a little better than what I did because being a snot-nosed teenager, I was too cool for anything cultural, and
Yeah.
I wish that I could go back and maybe have taken it in better. Um, so yeah, it wasn't until I was much older and with my photography that I actually started feeling more of a connection to my culture because the tattoo revitalization project that I've been part of.
Wow. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so my best friend that I spoke of that was in Cambridge Bay at the hostel, um, she grew up in a small community. Um, they lived very cultural. They didn't have running water or power or anything, so they very much lived off the land. Um, and as she was growing up, she always admired this one woman that had her traditional tattoos, and Huvak had learned that one of the last tattooed women was passing away. So she took it upon herself to learn how to tattoo. And so we have gone up to 4 different communities in the north, and Huvak brings a few tattoo artists, and I document women's journeys as they get their traditional markings. So with being part of this project, before it started, there was 3 women in the north that had traditional markings, and now there's hundreds, if not thousands, of us that carry them now.
Wow, that's incredible. So your friend basically kept this piece of your culture alive, like
Oh,
saved it from extinction.
yeah, she did. She's amazing. I
Like, and
love
wow, you're amazing too. You're a part of that. You're documenting it and photography, taking photos of it and everything. Like, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's been amazing to
Wow.
be part of. Yeah.
So tell me about these traditional tattoos. It's women that get them, not men in the culture.
Yeah, traditionally it's been the project itself wanted to focus mostly on women. I believe, you know, it was so extinct from our culture that when Huvak had called me to tell me that she was thinking about getting her traditional tattoos on her face, I actually had to Google it to see
Mm,
if it was part of our culture because I hadn't even known that.
wow.
Yeah, um, so yeah, we wanted to focus mostly on women for the project, just to just start the healing with them. And I think historically men got piercings, like they
I
would get
see.
bone piercings. So
And was this a rite of passage from like childhood to womanhood, or what was the purpose of the ritual tattoo?
yeah, so there's multiple tattoos. Like we have tattoos on our fingers, and those
Mhm.
represent like Sedna, which is our goddess of the sea.
Yeah.
And when Sedna was happy, then there was plenty of fish and seals for us to hunt. And when she was angry, then the hunters needed to do something to please her. So that was part of our legends.
Yeah.
Um, and then on our arms, traditionally, I've got a little bit more than what we traditionally have, but on our arms we get usually like the bars, and those tell a woman's story. So that would be like your family story on if you became a seamstress, and um, yeah, it just tells your family
Yeah,
story.
yeah.
And
That's
then
very
yeah,
cool.
there's a V on the forehead that they would get on the chin and on our cheeks as well. We would also tattoo our thighs, and the thighs were for childbirth, so that the first thing that your child would see coming into the world would be beauty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And so like traditionally, what did they use to do the tattoos? Like, pardon my ignorance, like I don't even know what they used to do real like modern tattoos, but like were they using like squid ink? Like I don't know, what were they doing?
We would use oil or the soot from our kulix, which is we would have a stone
Mhm.
that we would put seal fat in, and we would use Arctic cotton to light for the winter time to keep our igloos warm, or to cook with.
Yeah.
So they would use the soot from that and a needle
Wow.
and sinew. So usually the needle, of course, would be made out of bone,
Yeah.
and they would pass that through the skin.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And so yeah, this tradition was like going extinct. There was one last person, and your friend learned it, and now you've passed this knowledge on, and you've passed the tradition onward. So I mean, yeah, that just blows me away that you guys did that. That's incredible.
Yeah. Pretty cool thing to say that I've been part of.
Yeah, and so was that the start of you kind of rediscovering or reconnecting with your culture then?
Oh yeah. After the first project up in Iqaluktuuttiaq, Nunavut was, um, I being in the South, I was always, I want to say, for lack of better terms, I was always too brown to be in the South, but too white to be in the North. Like,
Mhm.
I would go up north and I wouldn't be treated, they would call me a Iqaluktuuttiaq, which means a white man, right?
Right.
Um, because I wasn't raised up there. I didn't know our language. I didn't know our culture at all, really,
Yeah.
um, and not by choice.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, when I was part of the project, and at the end there of the project, Huvak and I were in Yellowknife together, and she's like, "Are you ready for your tattoo?" And I was like, at that time, I didn't feel like I was Inuk enough
Right.
I felt like I needed something. I needed to know the language. I needed to, I felt like I was lacking being Inuk.
Right.
So yeah, and she talked me through it, and we drew out, if I were to get a tattoo, what I would want it to represent. And at that point I was like, okay, let's do this. And ever since then, it was like that was part of my soul that was missing.
Right.
It's brought in a bigger connection to the culture and to my ancestors that I never would have imagined.
Wow. What an incredible story. Huh.
Mhm.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Wow. And so what, from that point on, like if somebody wanted to learn about your culture, what would be their avenues? I mean, are there books? Are there people out there that are telling the stories of your people that you can go on YouTube and see them? Or like, how can we learn more about this culture that almost went extinct in some ways?
Yeah, there's so many people out there now, with the help of the internet. Inuit have access to the world now, and it's great to see. There's some, like, Huvuk is on TikTok, and her son have done some TikToks together where they've gotten a lot of attention from it. Like, they share a lot of traditional knowledge, and there's plenty of TikTokers out there that are sharing our culture and spreading the word about us, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there about Inuit when it comes to trees and all that stuff. So
Oh, is that right? Yeah. Well,
yeah.
we haven't even gotten into that yet, but yeah, I imagine there's lots of lots of that kind of stuff. I mean, unfortunately, most of the people that look like me, including myself, are quite ignorant about this history. Like I know broadly speaking that terrible things were done to all kinds of indigenous people across the country, that dishonesty was used in the dealings. I'm aware at a high level that like it was terrible, like that, terrible things happen. But to learn now more about when we had Alan Sutherland speaking, to learn more about the government, the history, the policies behind it, excuse me, and then to learn that the intention of this whole thing was to be a collaborative endeavor. It was supposed to be our country. We're supposed, like, I envision a timeline where like a person like me would know about your culture and may even be involved in your culture, may even have, you know what I mean? Because it's like if we had integrated, we would have been so much better for it. Like we would have been so much better for it, because so much of the traditional knowledge and the philosophy that many of these groups of people had is exactly what's missing today, right?
Mhm.
No respect for nature, no connection to nature. And that's what drives climate change, pollution, greed, and like pillaging of resources. It's all because we think that we're us and that's nature and we're separate,
Mhm.
right? This lack of connection. And so it was, to me, it was such a revelatory moment to be like, think about what would have it been like if it had been a true partnership the whole way through. And so now, like, I just like, I want to learn more about all these different cultures. I want to get connected with them, because I feel like we could have been one people. And
Mhm.
that's what we need to be right now as human beings. We need to become one people if we want to survive and thrive and continue to evolve. And so I guess, why not start right here? So that's awesome that you can find this stuff on TikTok. My assumption was that TikTok is just trash, but obviously there's people on there who are using it to spread real valuable knowledge.
Yeah, there is. It's amazing. Even like Shina Nova and her mom, they're part of my gold series that I've done, and they do the same thing where they throat sing and show people, parts of our culture that most people wouldn't have access to. So it's amazing.
Yeah, that's great. And you're doing that with your photography.
Yeah, yeah.
So did you start out in photography? Was that your first? I mean, I imagine you've been trained in it, or how did you come into photography? How did you pick that up?
So I'm just gonna move here a little bit
Yeah, no worries.
here. So with photography, I got started with it with Huvuk. Um, we
So that
used
project
to
was your first project.
no,
Oh, okay.
no, no.
I was
So
like,
when we
whoa.
were when we were teenage girls, we used to go to the Northern store in Cambridge Bay and buy up all the Polaroid film that was in town. And I would make her dress up, and I would take her photos. So she was always my first subject. And yeah, that's where my love of photography started. And then after that, my talent for it and love for it just grew. And I, as I would get a new camera, I would have to learn everything about it and push it to the maximum. So yeah, it's been a wild journey now.
So it's basically your passion, it sounds like.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
good for you. And you get to do it in again, a meaningful way. You're tying your passion in with your culture, and you're doing like all this great work with it, which is just, yeah, that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
Good for you. Yeah. And so what else have you photographed, or what other subjects have you kind of experimented with?
Um, so I've been doing most recently I've been doing a gold series, I call it, and that's garnered quite a bit of attention nationally. Um, I am going to be featured in an exhibit at the Vancouver Maritime Museum from October till April, and that is going to it's all about the gold series. So the gold series is a celebration of Inuit women, and I painted them in gold, and they have, and we're celebrating our markings. And so the exhibit is a, oh my goodness, the exhibit is called Souls Ignited. Re Oh my goodness, now I'm drawing a blank.
It's all good.
Souls Ignited. Something, the voices of our ancestors. Reawakening the voices of our ancestors. There we go.
Nice. That's powerful name. Glad you gave it some time to get the title there, because that's reawakening the voices of the ancestors. Yeah. Wow. Well, that's part of what I imagine is meant by reconciliation. It's not just saying we're sorry. It's not just saying, yeah, the bad things were done. It's like your languages and cultures were almost exterminated, and so how can we now reverse course and rectify that and bring it back and help you bring it back and do whatever we can? To me, that's has to be a part of it, because the cultural genocide is, I mean, culture is your programming, it's your identity, it's your reality. You see the world through your culture, and it shapes the world for you, and two different cultures see the world very differently. So it's like to take something like that away from a person and to just supplant it with your own culture is, to me, that's, I mean, it's yeah. Anyways, hard to imagine how you could do that to another person, but yeah. So you're doing amazing work to try and, again, like you said, reawaken and bring that culture back.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow. So may I ask, when can you quit doing insurance and just go do photography full time?
That I'd like to know too. No, I do like insurance.
I know. Everyone likes insurance, right?
Oh
Everybody.
yeah, we are good people that do it.
Yeah. But is that part? And again, like, just out of curiosity, because I have a passion too, and if I had the chance to do it for a living, as much as I love the people I work with and the company that we work with and all that stuff, I wouldn't hesitate to go and follow my dream and my passion. So is that something that you're content to just do on the side as a passion project, or is that something that maybe one day you'll be doing full time?
So I would love to say that it would be something that I could do full time. I don't know, like, I'm living in small town Vermilion, Alberta, with 5,000 people and not an Inuk around. So I don't know how that would look, or, right now it's just, it just seems out of hands reach right now. But it's, I would never have thought I would do an exhibit 3 years ago. If you would have told me that, I was a broken woman that just got out of a marriage of 20 years.
Right.
And then now I'm like going to be in a magazine, for a national magazine, and have an exhibit, so I would never have thought that would be possible. So I'm I'm a true believer that you just put it out in the universe and
Mhm.
whatever happens, happens. So
Well, again, certainly from the outside looking in, you're trending in the right direction. You know what I mean?
yeah.
In 3 year span, you've come a long way from by your own account. And so, yeah, definitely going to put a link to your photography website, a link to this exhibit as well, so that people can catch it, especially if they're in the area. Because I'm on Vancouver Island, so I'm in
Oh,
the area ish. But yeah, I'm sure there's people out there that'd be interested. And yeah, wow, incredible. So let's talk politics then, real quick. It sounds to me, and I'm hoping you can tell me your opinion on this. It sounds to me that there's really no political party, at least at like the federal level, probably not even at the provincial level, that has actually done anything good in terms of this whole truth and reconciliation. It seems like it seems to me like hollow words. Is that what's your sense of the work that's being done? The fact that now it's a federal holiday, for example, do you view that as lip service? Do you view that as legitimate attempts to reconcile, or what's your take on kind of where we're at with that?
well, it's a hard one to say. I know what my hope is that with having September 30th as a holiday now, um, my hope is that most people will use the day for what it's meant to be.
Mhm.
It's hard when I know, like last year, Trudeau went to the cottage instead of doing anything on September 30th, So it's a hard it's hard when your leader isn't necessarily doing what the day was supposed to be. Um, Mind you, like with that being said, I feel like he did rally to have the Pope make an apology, and I actually had gotten asked to accompany Inuit survivors to the papal apology in Edmonton.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was quite an emotional time to be part of and to witness. It was quite historic to be part of that too.
Yeah. Wow. So, and again, like an apology is nice, but as I always tell my kids, show, don't tell. If you're
Mhm.
going to apologize for doing the same thing over and over again, it doesn't seem like you're sorry. You might say it. And so, what does sorry look like for someone like yourself? Like, I'm just curious about your personal take on it because everyone's going to have a different sort of answer. But like, yeah, what does sorry look like for not only for the Pope and the Catholic Church, but for the government, right? Because I know Stephen Harper apologized for the residential schools. Great. What does that look like to you?
Yeah, I would say that we're making the right steps. I feel like it's not only just going to come from the government and those who are in charge. It's also it also rests on the average Joe
Mm-hmm.
shoulders to um there, like I said earlier, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of biases that were built and stereotypes that were built throughout so many years that people need to take that step themselves to um realize their part and what they could do, or just even being willing to take that step to understanding why somebody might be a drunk. There's reasons behind it. It's not because anybody chooses to be an alcoholic. There's so much trauma that has happened for so many generations that we just need to learn so that we can be better.
Mm. Yeah, well put. I agree. And so something that I grapple with as well is that what can I do, right? You're saying the average Joe. I would consider myself the average Joe, to some extent. So it's like educating myself from what you just said is one thing that I can do, which I agree with. Looking at my own biases, 100%. And the thing with biases is they're naturally hard to look at, right? Because they're not conscious things that we think about. It's like behind the scenes, it's influencing the way we view things. But that's very, very good advice. What can I do in terms of like I don't know, the system and the systemic issues that might be plaguing some of your communities, like you were saying, alcoholism and things like that, due to trauma, and that of course lines up really really well with what Gabor Mate says about addiction, right? I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's a man who's worked with in addictions his whole life. He's a doctor, and he says that behind every addiction is a trauma. It's that simple. He's never worked with an addict who didn't have some trauma that was kind of at the root of it, right? And so what can I do, or what can people like me do in terms of the system and the yeah, because I agree that there's a lot of personal stuff to do, but I view the system now as really the biggest hurdle. But I don't see anybody out there, politically, that's really advocating in a way that I think makes sense. So what's the way forward? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a big start would be just becoming an ally and, you know, making those calls to the government and being like, do better, be better. Because, there's so much that, from in Nunavut, we have the highest rate of suicide because there is nobody up there to give help. Like, we have social workers or therapists that go up there for a week every few months.
Yeah.
And by the time that one person, somebody with so much trauma in their life, so many, take my brother-in-law, for example, like he has been the pallbearer for probably about 30 people. So, and he's only 48.
Oh my goodness.
And being a pallbearer is no light task, right? Like that means that he was close to these people. He's had, so much trauma. So there's the suicide rates, there's the alcohol addictions. Housing is absolutely horrific in Nunavut.
How so?
You have usually 13 people living in a 2-bedroom house.
Oh wow, okay.
And multi-generations, because the way that it works up there is that there's no apartments available for you just to go, oh, you're 18, let's go get a house now,
Right.
That's not a thing. So what happens is that you put your name on a housing list and you could be waiting for up to 10 years.
Wow. So there's just not nearly enough housing up there.
Yeah. And the way that it works is that, like, the housing plan, like, so elders get a house, people with families. So the way that it's built is to make people have kids at a young age so that they can get up on the housing list.
Oh wow, the incentive is there almost for that. Yeah. Oh wow, interesting. So and these are all very, very much systemic issues. They're not like, there's not much that an individual can do, but by putting pressure on the system to change and make improvements, you're saying that's one thing that we can do.
Yeah. Like, there is last term, the NDP, I can't say her name. There was an Inuit woman that was in power up in Nunavut for the NDP party, and she actually did a tour to all the to a bunch of communities. I don't know if she went to all of them, but during her tour, she saw the harsh realities that Inuit are forced to live in, where they're living in houses with mold.
Yeah.
And there's nowhere for them to go.
Yeah.
Like, there is no other option. So, yeah, it's a sad reality, that's for sure.
Yeah. So what's the history in that part of Canada, like in terms of treaties and government dealings between the Indigenous people and the government? Like, because from my understanding, Nunavut is its own province or territory, but that's not that old, right? I mean, that's a fairly recent thing. Like in my lifetime, I believe that it became
1999.
Oh wow, okay, yeah. So what was it before 1999? What was the situation? It was just part of a different territory, or
It was part of the NWT.
oh okay,
Yeah.
it was part, and then did it secede? Like the Quebecers, did it separate? Or
No.
what happened?
So what happened is it's part of the land claim agreement. So Inuit are self-governed now, but we've still got to answer to the big guys, you know. But yeah, we not separated. NWT basically just got split up.
Okay.
Because the portions that were mostly Inuit inhabited,
Yeah.
that is now part of the Northwest Territories, and then there's NWT with the Dene, and there is the Inuit there, and yeah.
So the Inuit are in Nunavut, most of them. Okay, interesting. I did, yeah, see, again, another thing I didn't know about. And so basically before that, like the Inuit and the government, what was the sort of history with their dealings? Because I'm sure every indigenous group has had different relationships with the government, different histories. Are you familiar at all with the sort of background there?
I wish I could say that I was, but yeah, like I said, NWT and Nunavut became two separate entities in 1999, and by that point I was already, you know,
yeah.
I was too much of a little teenage girl to be worried about anything like that.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. I didn't start looking into politics until I was 30, so I can understand that for sure. Oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about, or any messages that you wanted to share with people about, again, like you talked about misconceptions. What are some of the misconceptions that you can debunk for us, like right here? And I don't even know what they are, but stereotypes, biases, you're saying misinformation. Like what are some of the most egregious ones that you just want to like blow out of the water for us right here?
Okay, yeah, so we do pay taxes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
We do.
Yeah.
And actually Nunavut has some of the highest rates of taxes on top of the outrageous living costs up there. You know, we do definitely pay the most taxes and the highest cost of living. So we don't have Inuit didn't sign treaties. We have signed a land claims agreement. So yeah, we do get, our education, healthcare, things like that. But it's, it's not a free ride, and Indigenous people as it is have never had a free ride. So I hope that everybody is starting to come to terms with that and starting to realize that that's not really, it's not taxpayers' money that people are living off of. It was money that was put away for treaties that, that are going towards these things. It's not mine or yours money that's getting paid into it. So.
Yeah, wow, and that's good right there. I didn't know that. I didn't. Not that I have a problem with, even if it did come from my taxpayers' dollars, because again, the way I see it, the system screwed your ancestors. The system took your ancestors' lands, did all these things, tried to wipe out your language, your culture, tried to take away everything that you had. The free ride is the least of my concerns. Where that money's coming from, it's like when you do something like that to a group of people, there has to be reparations. So that part doesn't bother me at all. But I just always assumed it came from taxes. But yeah, there's money set aside for these things.
Yeah, when they first started when the treaties were first signed, that's when a bunch of money was put aside, and that has been invested, and that has grown throughout the years. So that is where the money comes from for everything. Wow. It's not necessarily from taxpayers. So yeah. And like you said, like when people's whole livelihoods and cultures have been ripped away from them,
things have to be made whole again. And clearly they haven't been made whole, not even close yet. And so I guess my last question for you, the last thing that I would like to discuss is, what does it look like? How, let me think about how to phrase it. What does true reconciliation look like? What does it look like when reconciliation is done? What does Canada look like? What's the state of Indigenous people? Like in your mind, like how would you feel when will you feel that reconciliation has happened? What are some of the signs or some of the things that you feel like these things need to happen before we can say that we've fully reconciled?
To me, reconciliation would look like my people having access to good health care, um, being able to have a house when they want to move out,
Mhm.
you know, not having to live below the poverty line. And when both you and I can go down the street and be looked at the exact same,
Mm.
that's when reconciliation has happened.
Wow. I don't feel like that's asking for a lot. I wish it
Yeah.
was here already. It should be here already, but
Yeah.
one day at a time. Yeah.
Hmm.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for sharing all of that. That was very enlightening for me, and I'm sure my audience will feel the same way. And as I said, in the description of the video, I will put a link to your website, and as well, maybe you can send me the names of those two individuals you mentioned on TikTok, because I would like to add them, and then I would also like to link to their TikToks down below.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
That was my pleasure. Yeah, thanks again for accepting the invite, and I'll let you know